All right, everybody, let's go over the basics of a trap bar deadlift today. We do a lot of trap bar deadlifting here at Revo because it's just simpler to engage with than a conventional deadlift. And we find that folks actually improve their strength gains faster and to a greater degree than compared to a conventional deadlift. When you first step into the bar, the first cue that you'll want to pay attention to is to making sure your shins are centered with the bar. If your shins are too far forward or too far back, you'll change your leverage on the lift. If anything, your shins can be just a little bit behind the center of the bar, but not too much. Certainly don't have them forward because the lift is going to be so much harder. Once you've centered yourself inside the bar, you want to check your grip. A trap bar deadlift is a heavy lift, and you want to have a really aggressive grip. What I mean by that is the knurling on this bar should be resting on the pads, the knuckles of your fingers here. Do not let that bar rest in the cradle of your fingers because you will lose your grip, or at the very least, you'll limit your lift. So when you get that aggressive grip, palms go on the top of the bar here, and you wrap underneath really aggressively so that bar can rest right on those pads of your fingers. You get down to that grip position not by squatting down through your knees, but by using your hips first. How I cue it typically is pretend you're pushing your butt back to a bullseye, and you want to hit the bullseye with your butt first before your knees start to drop. So when I push my butt back, I start to feel some tension gain in my hamstrings. Once I'm there, then I know I can safely drop my knees and that this lift will be completed primarily with my hips rather than my knees or my back. So step into the bar, get your aggressive grip going, and then drive your hips back, feel that tension in your hamstrings, and only then do I want you to drop your hips through your knees. The most successful trap bar deadlifting I see is when a person can develop tension from top to bottom and back up again. And where we start developing that tension, once we've gotten into our butt back to the bullseye position and we've got our aggressive grip established here, what I ask folks to do is squeeze these handles into your shins or into your knees as hard as you can. And once we do that, if we squeeze those handlebars into our shins or into our knees, watch what happens to my elbows. They point outward, okay? My elbows point outward, and my shoulder blades are squeezing together. So two different things are happening based off of one single cue. I like to make our lift cueing as simple as possible. So if I get my aggressive grip and I squeeze those handles into my shins or into my knees as hard as I can, my elbows point out, my shoulder blades are squeezing together, and automatically my core, my abs and my back turn on to help support the tension in my trunk. Once we're there, this is the simplest lift in the world. All you have to do is stand up. How I like to cue our athletes is I ask them to drive their feet into the floor as firmly as they can and drive their hips forward as if they're pushing them into a wall that's in front of them. So I've got my aggressive grip, my hips are back, I'm squeezing my handles in to the body, and I'm going to push my feet into the floor and drive my hips forward. Now, there are a couple of technique cues that I think are really helpful for someone who might be a beginner with this lift or a novice and someone who is a lot more experienced. We have an option to perform a dead stop or a touch and go. For the more experienced trap bar deadlifter, the touch and go is fine, and that's generally the person who is able to hold their tension top to bottom throughout the duration of the lift. For a novice and someone who is still learning how to develop and hold that tension, I like the dead stop better because that affords them the opportunity to get their lift in, and just hit the reset button at the bottom. So they can regrip if they need to, redevelop that trunk tension by squeezing those handles in, and figure out how to drive that force through their feet and through their hips all over again. It becomes a neuromuscular pattern that we can kind of grease and develop by doing that dead stop versus the touch and go like this. Now let's talk about mistakes that we see people make most commonly. There are two. The first one is that I see people, and this is typically with less experienced lifters or more novice lifters, especially with this lift here. What I see folks do is they'll get to the top of their lift just fine, then they get back to the bottom and they dive into the bottom, their arms shorten, their shoulders drop, their hips rise, and they've effectively lost almost all of their full body tension for the lift. So that when they try to pick the bar up again, their hips rise. And that's the second mistake, where their hips rise early and you've effectively shifted the lever of this motion, the primary lever, from your hips to your back. So this becomes a very back-centric lift. So two major mistakes. Diving into your arms and shoulders at the bottom and not maintaining tension, and or rising your hips early to make the lever for this lift your low back instead of your hips. So those are the basics, do's and don'ts for trap bar deadlift. We love this lift here. It's one of the things we do very frequently throughout the year. And I hope you learned a little bit of something about how to improve your form.